A bullied teen stood up to a mugger, never guessing the victim was the principal in disguise. The thought hadn't even crossed Ethan Parker's mind as he sprinted down the rain-slicked alley, heart hammering against his ribs. He'd simply seen someone in trouble and acted, a stark contrast to how he typically moved through the world, head down, invisible, surviving one day at a time. The evening had begun like countless others. Ethan had stayed late at the library, his sanctuary from the hollow echo of his empty apartment and the memory of taunts that followed him through the school hallways. Books didn't judge. Books didn't corner you by your locker or trip you in the cafeteria while others laughed. At 17, he had perfected the art of disappearing until tonight. Walking home, hood pulled against the autumn chill, Ethan had noticed the struggle before he fully registered what was happening. A man in a worn gray coat was backing away from a taller figure in black, hands raised defensively. The glint of metal caught the streetlight. A knife. "Just take it easy," the gray-coated man was saying, voice remarkably steady despite the weapon pointed at his chest. "You don't need to do this." Something inside Ethan shifted. Later, he wouldn't be able to explain what made him drop his backpack and move. Perhaps it was the countless times he'd wished someone, anyone, would intervene when he was cornered. Perhaps it was simply that, in that moment, he wasn't Ethan Parker, the shadow kid who flinched at sudden movements. He was just a human witnessing another human in danger. He didn't think. His body moved of its own accord, adrenaline burning away fear as he charged forward. The world narrowed to a tunnel of focus. The mugger's startled expression, the victim's wide eyes, the cold air burning his lungs as he shouted, "Hey!" The mugger turned, momentarily confused by this skinny teenager running toward him instead of away. That split-second hesitation was all Ethan needed. He slammed into the attacker with his shoulder, sending them both sprawling onto the wet pavement. The knife clattered away into a puddle. Pain exploded across Ethan's face as the mugger's fist connected with his jaw. Stars danced in his vision. He tasted copper. But something primitive had awakened in him. The same fierce instinct that had propelled him into this fight refused to let him surrender. Ethan scrambled backward, hands searching blindly until his fingers closed around cold metal. The knife. He didn't point it, didn't threaten, just held it visible enough that the message was clear. This ends now. The mugger, face obscured by his hood, seemed to calculate his odds. After a tense heartbeat that felt like eternity, he spat a curse and ran, footsteps fading into the rainy night. Trembling, Ethan dropped the knife as though it had burned him. His jaw throbbed. His knees felt weak. The enormity of what he'd just done crashed over him like a wave. "That was," the gray-coated man began, voice hoarse with emotion, "the bravest thing I've ever seen." Ethan turned, really looking at the stranger for the first time. The man was older, perhaps in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind rain-spotted glasses. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, but Ethan couldn't place him through the fog of adrenaline. "Are you all right?" the man asked, approaching cautiously as one might a wounded animal. Ethan touched his jaw, wincing. "I'm fine. You should probably go home, sir. It's not safe." The man studied him with an intensity that made Ethan uncomfortable. Not the cruel assessment of the bullies who looked for weaknesses to exploit, but something deeper, as though he were seeing something in Ethan that Ethan himself couldn't see. "You're bleeding," the man said softly. "Let me help you. There's a diner around the corner. Least I can do is buy you a cup of coffee and some ice for that jaw." Ethan hesitated. His instinct was to refuse, to retreat back into invisibility. But something in the man's eyes, a genuine concern that felt unfamiliar yet desperately needed, made him nod. "I'm Robert," the man said, retrieving Ethan's backpack and handing it to him with careful movements. "And I owe you more than just coffee." The diner was a relic from another era. Red vinyl booths, flickering fluorescent lights, the comforting smell of grease and coffee. It was nearly empty at this hour, just a tired-looking waitress and an elderly couple in the far corner. Ethan slid into a booth by the window, pressing a napkin-wrapped ice pack against his swelling jaw. Robert returned from the counter with 2 steaming mugs. "They're bringing some food, too. You look like you could use it." Ethan started to protest but stopped when his stomach growled traitorously. When was the last time he'd eaten? Lunch, maybe, if you could call a half-eaten apple lunch. "Thank you." He mumbled instead. The words felt strange in his mouth, unpracticed. "No, Ethan." "Thank you." Robert sipped his coffee, watching the rain streak the window. Ethan froze. "How do you know my name?" Robert smiled gently. "We haven't been formally introduced, but I know who you are." A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the rain crept up Ethan's spine. Had he just walked into some kind of trap? His eyes darted to the exit. "I'm not going to hurt you," Robert said quickly, reading his panic. "I'm sorry, that came out wrong." He reached for his wallet and pulled out a small card, sliding it across the table. Ethan picked it up with numb fingers. The card read, "Robert Mercer, Principal, Westridge High School." The world tilted sideways. Principal Mercer. Of course. The man whose office Ethan had visited just once, after an incident last year when Jason Hobbs and his friends had locked him in the janitor's closet overnight. The principal had been kind but ineffectual. Nothing had changed. You're our principal." Ethan's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "Why were you in that alley? At night? Alone?" Principal Mercer's expression shifted, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. "Sometimes I walk through the neighborhood. It helps me understand what our students face outside school walls." He paused, his fingers tapping the edge of his mug. "The school board doesn't always appreciate my methods." The waitress arrived with plates of eggs, toast, and hash browns. Ethan couldn't remember the last time someone had bought him a meal. His mother worked double shifts most days, leaving him to fend for himself with whatever was in the refrigerator, which wasn't much lately. "Eat," Principal Mercer encouraged gently. "We can talk while you do." Ethan took a cautious bite, then another. The simple hot food was the most comforting thing he'd experienced in months. "What you did tonight," Principal Mercer continued, "tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are, Ethan. You put yourself at risk for a complete stranger." Ethan swallowed hard. "I just reacted. Character is what you do when no one is watching. When there's nothing to gain." Principal Mercer leaned forward. "Do you know what I see at school every day? I see you trying to disappear. I see others making your life miserable. And I've failed to stop it." The blunt acknowledgement stunned Ethan into silence. Adults usually offered empty platitudes or ignored the problem entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" Ethan finally asked, his voice barely audible over the diner's soft, ambient noise. "Because tonight you showed me something I needed to see." Principal Mercer's eyes were bright with an emotion Ethan couldn't name. "And I think maybe I can show you something you need to see too." "What's that?" "Your own strength." Those three words hung in the air between them, simple yet somehow monumental. Ethan looked down at his plate, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar feeling of being truly seen. "I don't feel very strong," he admitted. "Strength isn't about muscle, Ethan." Principal Mercer's voice was gentle. "It's about knowing who you are and standing firm in that knowledge. Tonight, when it mattered, you knew exactly who you were." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like applause. For the first time in longer than he could remember, something like hope flickered in Ethan's chest, fragile as a match flame in the wind. But there, neither of them could have predicted how that chance encounter would alter the course of both their lives. The next morning, Ethan's jaw ached with every word. The bruise had bloomed into a spectacular purple-yellow stain across his face. His mother had already left for work when he woke, leaving him alone to contemplate his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He almost didn't recognize himself. Not because of the bruise, but because of something different in his eyes. As though the person who had charged into that alley last night had never fully retreated. Walking through the school entrance felt different too. The usual knot of dread in his stomach was still there, but something else accompanied it. A quiet certainty that whatever happened today, he had already faced worse and survived. The whispers started immediately. The bruise was impossible to miss. "Dude, what happened to your face?" Ethan turned to find Marco Esteves staring at him. Marco wasn't one of his tormentors, but they weren't friends either. No one was friends with Ethan. "Got in a fight," Ethan said simply, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. Marco raised his eyebrows, clearly not believing him, but didn't press. Ethan continued to his locker, aware of the stares following him. When he closed his locker door, Jason Hobbs was there, 6 feet of athletic privilege and casual cruelty. The ringleader. The reason Ethan had learned to become invisible. Well, Jason drawled, leaning against the locker next to Ethan's. Someone finally gave Parker what he deserved. The familiar shame and fear rose in Ethan's throat, bitter as bile. But alongside it came something else. The memory of standing in the rain, knife in hand, facing down a threat and not backing down. Ethan said nothing, just looked at Jason directly, maintaining eye contact longer than he ever had before. "What are you looking at?" Jason's voice took on a dangerous edge. "Nothing worth my time," Ethan replied quietly, then walked away. He made it 3 steps before Jason grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. "What did you just say to me?" The hallway went quiet. This was the moment Ethan would normally stammer an apology, shoulders hunched, eyes down. The moment he would offer whatever Jason wanted, homework answers, lunch money, his dignity, just to make the encounter end. Instead, he stood straight, his voice clear despite his throbbing jaw. I said you're not worth my time. And you're not. Not anymore. Jason's face contorted with rage. His fist drew back. Mr. Hobbs. The voice cut through the tension like a knife. Principal Mercer stood at the end of the hallway, his expression unreadable. My office. Now. Jason's fist slowly lowered. He shot Ethan a venomous look before slinking after the principal. Ethan stood frozen, heart pounding, as the gathered students dispersed in a flurry of whispers. He caught Principal Mercer's eye just before the man turned away. There was no acknowledgement of their encounter the previous night, just a slight nod, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. By lunchtime, the story had morphed into wild speculation. Some said Ethan had fought back against Jason and gotten the bruise that way. Others claimed he'd been jumped by a gang over the weekend. No one guessed the truth. Ethan sat alone as usual, picking at his sandwich when a lunch tray clattered onto the table across from him. He looked up to find Marco settling into the seat. So, Marco said casually, you gonna tell me what really happened to your face? Ethan hesitated. The truth seemed too bizarre to share. Why do you care? Marco shrugged. Because whatever happened turned you from the kid who stares at his shoes into the kid who just stood up to Jason Hobbs. That's a transformation worth knowing about. Something about Marco's straightforward curiosity broke through Ethan's defenses. I stopped a mugging. Marco's sandwich paused halfway to his mouth. You're serious? Yeah, that's actually pretty badass, Parker. Ethan felt a smile tug at his lips. The first real one in months. It was kind of stupid, actually. I didn't think, just reacted. Sometimes that's how the best things happen. Marco replied, taking a bite of his sandwich. So you want to come over and play Covenant War after school? I need someone who doesn't suck for my team. The invitation was so casual, so unexpected, that Ethan didn't immediately recognize it for what it was. A hand extended across the chasm of his isolation. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I'd like that. Across the cafeteria, Principal Mercer watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction before slipping away unnoticed. The next 2 weeks unfolded in subtle shifts. Ethan's bruise faded, but the change in him did not. He walked differently, head up, eyes forward. He spoke in class occasionally. He spent afternoons with Marco, who introduced him to other students who shared their interest in strategy games and science fiction. Jason Hobbs had received 2 weeks of detention and was conspicuously avoiding Ethan. The respite from constant torment allowed something to unfurl inside Ethan. A tentative belief that perhaps he deserved to take up space in the world after all. Then came the letter. He found it in his locker on a Friday afternoon, a cream-colored envelope with his name written in neat penmanship. Inside was a note and a business card. Ethan, if you're interested in continuing what you started, meet me at this address tomorrow at 10 a.m. Wear comfortable clothes. ARM. The card bore the name and address of a community center across town. No other explanation. Curiosity won out over caution. The next morning, Ethan took the bus across town, finding himself outside a brick building with a small sign reading Westridge Community Center. Inside, he followed the sound of voices to a large room where a dozen kids ranging from elementary to high school age were gathered on blue mats. Principal Mercer stood at the front, dressed not in his usual suit but in a simple black t-shirt and track pants. He smiled when he saw Ethan hesitating in the doorway. Glad you could make it, he said, gesturing Ethan inside. We're just about to begin. Begin what? Ethan asked, taking in the scene with confusion. Self-defense class. Principal Mercer's eyes held the same intensity they had that night in the alley. I volunteer here on weekends. These kids come from tough situations. I teach them how to protect themselves, but more importantly, how to believe in their own worth. Ethan looked at the children, some clearly from troubled homes, others bearing the same haunted look he often saw in his own mirror. Why am I here? Because you already know how to stand up when it matters. I thought you might help me teach others to do the same. The request was so unexpected that Ethan nearly laughed. I'm not a teacher. I'm barely keeping it together myself. Principal Mercer placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture so paternal that Ethan had to fight the sudden sting of tears. We're all barely keeping it together, Ethan. The secret is helping each other through it. Something shifted in Ethan's chest, a recognition that perhaps his worth wasn't measured by how others treated him, but by what he could offer them. He had stepped into that alley because someone needed help. Maybe that wasn't weakness or foolishness. Maybe that was his strength. What do you need me to do? He asked. Principal Mercer's smile widened. Just be yourself. The self I saw that night in the rain. For the next 2 hours, Ethan helped demonstrate techniques, worked with younger kids who struggled, and found himself sharing stories about bullying and how to handle it. The children looked at him with a respect he'd never experienced before. Not because he was the toughest or the smartest, but because he was honest about his struggles and still standing. When the class ended, Principal Mercer approached Ethan as the children filed out. You have a gift with them. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise but warmed by it nonetheless. They just need someone to listen. Don't we all? Principal Mercer studied him thoughtfully. Can I ask you something, Ethan? Why did you help me that night? The truth. The question caught Ethan off guard. He considered deflecting but found himself answering honestly. Because no one ever helped me. And I guess I didn't want to be the person who walks away. Principal Mercer nodded slowly. That night changed things for me too, you know. I've been the principal at Westridge for 8 years. I've seen what happens in those hallways. I've tried to stop it with policies and assemblies. He trailed off, looking suddenly older, more vulnerable. But watching you stand up to that mugger made me realize I've been handling it all wrong. Rules don't change hearts. Examples do. He gestured around the empty classroom. This is my real work. These kids, like you, are fighting battles most adults can't imagine. But I've kept it separate from my role as principal because it's easier to hide behind the desk than to get involved. Is that why you were in that alley? Part of this? Real work? Ethan asked. A shadow crossed Principal Mercer's face. Not exactly. I was actually following up on a tip about drug deals happening near where some of our students live. He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. Not very principal-like behavior, I know. The school board would have a fit if they knew. Ethan considered this revelation, understanding now why Principal Mercer had been so secretive about his identity that night. So what happens now? Now, Principal Mercer said with quiet determination, we both stop hiding. If you're willing to come back next weekend, that is. The invitation hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. This wasn't just about teaching self-defense to kids. It was about Ethan stepping fully into the person he glimpsed that night in the alley. Someone who didn't shrink from challenges, but met them head on. I'll be here, Ethan promised. Word spreads quickly in high schools. By midweek, Ethan's new association with Marco and his friends had been noticed. His calm stance against Jason Hobbs had been witnessed. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. In English class, Miss Winters asked for volunteers to read their personal essays aloud. Ethan, who normally would rather have died than draw attention to himself, raised his hand. The essay he'd written was about courage. Not the flashy heroism of movies, but the quiet courage of facing each day when the world seems determined to break you. As he read the final lines, he became aware of the absolute silence in the room. When he looked up, Ms. Winters was wiping surreptitiously at her eyes. Thank you, Ethan, she said softly. That was precisely what an essay should be. After class, a girl named Layla, whom he'd never spoken to, stopped him in the hallway. Your essay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt like you were talking about my life. Before he could respond, she hurried away. That afternoon, he spotted Layla sitting alone in the library, head bowed over a book. Without overthinking it, he approached her table. Mind if I sit? She looked up startled, then nodded. They worked in silence for a while before she spoke. How did you do it? Change, I mean. Ethan considered the question carefully. I'm not sure I have changed. Not really. I think maybe I just stopped trying to be invisible. Because of whatever happened to your face? She asked, gesturing to the fading bruise. No, Ethan said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Because someone saw me. Really saw me. And made me realize I was worth seeing. Layla's eyes filled with tears. I wish someone would see me like that. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and recognized the same hunger for connection, the same wounded dignity he'd carried for so long. I see you, he said simply. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic moment. Just 4 quiet words across a library table. But sometimes Ethan was learning. Those were the words that mattered most. Saturday mornings at the community center became Ethan's anchor. Each week brought new faces, children and teens referred by social workers, teachers, or sometimes Principal Mercer himself. Ethan discovered that his own experiences gave him a unique ability to connect with the kids who were most withdrawn, most wounded. You have a gift, Principal Mercer told him after one particularly challenging session with a 10-year-old boy who wouldn't speak to anyone, but eventually demonstrated a perfect defensive stance under Ethan's patient guidance. "I just understand," Ethan replied. "When your whole life is about protecting yourself, you recognize it in others." As autumn deepened into winter, so too did the connection between Ethan and Principal Mercer. Their shared secret, that night in the alley, had formed the foundation for something neither had expected: mentorship that was gradually becoming friendship. At school, they maintained appropriate student-principal boundaries. But at the community center, those lines blurred. Ethan learned that Robert Mercer had lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier, that he had a daughter in college who called every Sunday, that he had been a troubled teen himself before a high school coach had intervened and changed his life's trajectory. "That's why I do this," he explained one day as they cleaned up after class. "Someone did it for me. I'm just paying it forward." "Is that why you became a principal?" Ethan asked. Principal Mercer's expression turned wistful. "I became a principal to make a difference. But somewhere along the way, I got caught up in budgets and test scores and board politics. I forgot that the real work happens in moments, not meetings." He looked at Ethan with sudden intensity. "Don't ever lose sight of that, Ethan. The system will always try to make you focus on the wrong things, the metrics, the appearances, but one human connecting with another, that's where change happens." The words resonated deep within Ethan, crystallizing something he'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. His life was changing, not because his circumstances had dramatically improved, but because he was connected now, to Marco and his friends, to Layla, who had started joining their lunch table, to the kids at the center, and to Principal Mercer. The connections had made him visible again, not just to others but to himself. The revelation came in December, on the last day before winter break. Ethan was cleaning out his locker when he overheard two teachers talking around the corner. "Did you hear? Mercer's contract might not be renewed." "What? Why not?" "The board thinks he's too soft on discipline issues. Enrollment is down, and they're looking for someone who'll crack down harder. Make the school more attractive to families from the north side." "That's ridiculous. Robert cares more about these kids than anyone I've ever worked with. Caring doesn't improve test scores. At least that's what the board thinks." The voices faded as the teachers moved away, but the words had lodged in Ethan's chest like shards of ice. Principal Mercer might lose his job, and partly because of how he'd handled discipline issues like Jason Hobbs. Because he'd chosen to protect students like Ethan instead of cracking down with zero-tolerance policies that looked good on paper. The injustice of it burned. Principal Mercer had changed Ethan's life, was changing the lives of kids at the community center every weekend, and the board wanted to replace him with someone who would be tougher. Ethan found himself walking toward the principal's office before he'd consciously decided to move. He needed to warn him, to do something, anything to prevent this from happening. The door to the outer office was open, but the secretary's desk was empty. Last day before break meant everyone was wrapping up early. Ethan could hear voices from the principal's closed inner office. He approached quietly, intending to wait, when he heard his own name. "Parker's situation is exactly what I'm talking about, Robert." The voice was unfamiliar, male, with the clipped tones of someone used to being listened to. Ethan Parker was being systematically tormented, Harold. Principal Mercer's voice was controlled but tight with restrained anger. Jason Hobbs had physically assaulted him multiple times. "And your solution was to give Hobbs detention? His father is on the board, Robert. Do you have any idea how that looked?" "I don't particularly care how it looked. I care about doing what's right for my students." A derisive snort. "Your students are why enrollment is dropping. Parents don't want to send their kids to a school where discipline is an afterthought." "Is that what this visit is really about, Harold? The board's decision on my contract?" A heavy sigh. "Look, Robert, we've known each other a long time. I'm here as a friend. The board meets January 15th to vote on administrative contracts. As it stands, yours won't be renewed. Because I wouldn't expel a bullied kid for finally standing up for himself. Because I believe in second chances. Because your priorities are out of alignment with the board's vision for Westridge. This isn't personal. It's always personal when it involves children's lives, Harold." A long silence followed, broken by the sound of a chair scraping back. "I've said what I came to say. Enjoy your holidays, Robert." Ethan backed away from the door just as it opened. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, nodded curtly at Ethan without really seeing him, and strode out of the office. Ethan stood frozen, unsure whether to leave or to knock. The decision was made for him when Principal Mercer appeared in the doorway, looking tired and older than Ethan had ever seen him. Ethan. His expression shifted immediately to concern. Is everything all right? No, Ethan wanted to say. Nothing is all right. You might lose your job because of me. Because you did the right thing. Instead, he asked, can I talk to you for a minute? Principal Mercer gestured him inside, closing the door. The office was warmly lit, bookshelves lining the walls. Not the sterile administrative space Ethan had expected when he'd been called here last year after the closet incident. What's on your mind? Principal Mercer asked, settling into his chair. Ethan hesitated, then decided truth was the only option. I overheard some teachers talking. They said you might not get your contract renewed. And then I heard what that man just said. Principal Mercer's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes dimmed slightly. Well, school politics isn't something you should worry about, Ethan. But it's because of me, isn't it? Because of how you handled Jason? No. The answer was firm, brooking no argument. It's because of a fundamental disagreement about what education should be. Some see schools as factories that produce test scores and college acceptances. I see them as places where young people learn who they are and what they're capable of becoming. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk. This isn't your burden to carry, Ethan. Whatever happens with my contract, I made my choices freely and would make them again. Ethan struggled to find words for the protest building inside him. This wasn't right. Principal Mercer had saved him, was saving others, and was being punished for it. What about the community center? He finally asked. What about the kids there? A smile touched Principal Mercer's lips. That work continues regardless. Some things are bigger than job titles. Ethan wanted to argue further, to find some solution, but Principal Mercer gently changed the subject. How are things with you? I've noticed you spending time with Marco Estevez and his friends. And Layla Chen too, I believe. The deliberate pivot was transparent, but Ethan allowed it. Yeah, it's different. They were different. Having people to talk to. Different good? Different good, Ethan confirmed. Layla's coming to the center tomorrow. She wants to help with the younger kids. Pride flickered across Principal Mercer's face. You're building something important, Ethan. Connections that matter. Never underestimate the power of that. As Ethan left the office, the conversation replayed in his mind. Principal Mercer had tried to shield him from worry, to make this about abstract educational philosophy rather than the very personal reality. The man might lose his career because he'd chosen to protect students like Ethan. The unfairness of it settled like a stone in his stomach. Principal Mercer had seen him when no one else did, had believed in him, had shown him his own strength. And now he was facing consequences for that very compassion. Ethan Parker, who had spent most of his life trying to disappear, suddenly found himself wanting to stand up and be counted, to be visible in a way that mattered. But how? Winter break passed in a blur of community center sessions, holiday celebrations that felt warmer this year with new friends, and increasingly urgent planning. Ethan, Marco, and Layla had formed an unlikely alliance around a shared purpose, saving Principal Mercer's job. The board meeting is January 15th, Ethan explained, spreading a calendar on Marco's bedroom floor. That gives us 2 weeks when school starts again. And you're sure he's getting fired? Marco asked, spinning a pencil between his fingers. Not fired. Non-renewed, Layla corrected. And yes, it sounds definite. The board thinks he's too soft on discipline. Marco snorted. Translation, he doesn't kiss up to the rich parents. So what exactly is our plan? Layla pressed. We're 3 high school kids against the school board. Not exactly a fair fight. Ethan looked at the calendar, his mind racing. We need stories. Not just ours, but everyone whose life Mercer has affected. And we need numbers. The board cares about enrollment? Let's show them what parents and students really think about Mercer's leadership. Marco raised an eyebrow. You want to start a petition or something? More than that. Ethan's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape. I want to start a movement. When school resumed in January, subtle changes began appearing throughout Westridge High. Posters with the hashtag Mercer Matters showed up on bulletin boards, featuring quotes from students about times Principal Mercer had made a difference in their lives. Small blue ribbons, the school's color, began appearing on backpacks and jacket lapels. A website launched, collecting testimonials from current students, alumni, parents, and community members. Principal Mercer noticed, of course. How could he not? But whenever he questioned students about the campaign, they smiled politely and changed the subject. The message was clear. This time, they were standing up for him. The movement grew as January progressed. Local news picked up the story after Marco's cousin, who worked at the town paper, got wind of it. Students rally behind beloved principal. Read the headline, accompanied by a photo of students wearing number Mercer Matters t-shirts. Behind the scenes, Ethan was working tirelessly. He'd reached out to kids from the community center and their parents, collected letters from teachers who supported Principal Mercer, and even convinced several local business owners to sign a statement about the principal's positive impact on the community. But his masterstroke came 1 week before the board meeting, when he finally revealed to Principal Mercer what had remained hidden since that rainy night in October. "You wanted to see me?" Ethan asked, poking his head into the principal's office after receiving a summons during last period. Principal Mercer gestured him inside, expression caught between amusement and exasperation. "I think it's time we discuss this campaign you've organized, don't you?" Ethan took a seat, neither confirming nor denying. "What campaign?" "Ethan." Principal Mercer's tone was gentle but firm. "I appreciate the sentiment. Truly. But this isn't a battle you need to fight. Someone should." Ethan replied simply. "You fought for me." Principal Mercer sighed deeply, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "This isn't the same thing, isn't it? You saw me when I was invisible. You showed me I had strength when I thought I was weak." Ethan leaned forward, intensity burning in his eyes. "That night in the alley changed my life. But not because I stopped a mugging. Because you didn't see a troubled kid. You saw someone worth believing in." Emotion flickered across Principal Mercer's face. "Ethan, let me finish." Ethan interrupted, surprising both of them with his boldness. "You've spent your career seeing people, really seeing them. The kids at the center, the students here, me. Now it's our turn to make sure others see you." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. "These are statements from 43 students who say you changed their lives. 17 parents who say you helped their families through difficult times. 8 teachers who say you're the best administrator they've ever worked with." Principal Mercer stared at the folder, visibly moved. "The board meeting is Monday night," Ethan continued. "We'll be there, all of us. But there's something else I need to tell you first." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I want to tell my story. The whole story, including the mugging. But I need your permission, because it involves you." Understanding dawned in Principal Mercer's eyes. "Ethan, that might not help my case with the board. If they discover I was in that neighborhood investigating potential drug activity without informing them, that's exactly why it will help." Ethan insisted. "You weren't just sitting behind a desk. You were out there trying to understand what your students face, trying to make things better, even if it meant putting yourself at risk." Principal Mercer considered this, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he nodded slowly. "If you feel it's important to tell your story, I won't stop you. But don't do it for me, Ethan. Do it because it's your truth." "It's both," Ethan said simply. As he left the office, Ethan felt a curious lightness. For so long, he'd been defined by what was done to him, the bullying, the isolation. Now he was defining himself by what he chose to do for others. The transformation felt right, like stepping into a version of himself that had been waiting patiently all along. Monday evening arrived with a sense of electric anticipation. The school board meeting, normally attended by a handful of parents and teachers, had been moved to the auditorium to accommodate the crowd. Over 200 people filled the seats. Students, parents, teachers, and community members, many wearing blue ribbons or number Mercer Matters t-shirts. Ethan, Marco, and Layla sat in the front row, alongside several kids from the community center and their parents. Principal Mercer sat at a table facing the board members, his expression composed despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. Board Chairman Harold Wells called the meeting to order, looking distinctly uncomfortable at the unexpected turnout. He cleared his throat. "Before we address the scheduled agenda items, I understand we have several community members who wish to speak." Marco squeezed Ethan's shoulder encouragingly as he stood and approached the microphone. "My name is Ethan Parker," he began, voice steadier than he'd expected. "I'm a junior at Westridge High." He took a breath, looking out at the sea of faces. Many familiar, some not, all attentive. 4 months ago, I was walking home from the library when I saw someone being mugged. I didn't think. I just acted. I ran toward the danger instead of away from it, and somehow I stopped the attack. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Principal Mercer watched him steadily, a quiet strength in his gaze. What I didn't know then was that the victim was Principal Mercer. He was in that neighborhood because he'd heard rumors about drug dealers targeting our students. He was there because he cares about what happens to us, even after school hours. Even when no one is watching, Ethan turned slightly to address Principal Mercer directly. You could have just thanked me and gone your way. But you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You showed me that standing up, being brave, wasn't a one-time accident. It was who I could choose to be every day. He faced the board again, his voice gaining strength. Before that night, I was bullied every day. I was invisible. I believed that was all I would ever be. Principal Mercer changed that, not just with words, but by example, by showing up, by seeing me. Ethan gestured to the audience behind him. Look around. Every person here has a story about how Principal Mercer made a difference in their life. Not because he enforced strict policies that look good on paper, but because he treats people like they matter. Because he believes in second chances and seeing beyond mistakes to the person underneath. Board Chairman Wells shifted uncomfortably. Thank you, Mr. Parker. We appreciate your input. I'm not finished, Ethan said firmly. You're considering not renewing Principal Mercer's contract because enrollment is down. Because you think he's too soft on discipline. I'm here to tell you that if Principal Mercer leaves, you'll lose more than enrollment numbers. You'll lose the heart of this school. One by one, others came forward. Students, parents, teachers, even the elderly custodian who had worked at Westridge for 30 years. Each shared stories of Principal Mercer's impact. The time he'd stayed late to help a struggling student with college applications. How he'd organized a food drive when a family's house burned down. The morning he'd stood in the rain directing traffic himself when the crosswalk guard called in sick. Last to speak was a small woman with tired eyes and calloused hands whom Ethan recognized immediately. His mother. I work 2 jobs, she said simply. I don't make it to school events. I don't have time to help with homework. Some days I barely see my son. Her voice caught. But every day for the past 4 months, my son has come home different. Stronger. Happier. Standing taller. She looked directly at Principal Mercer. I didn't know why until today. I didn't know someone had seen my boy, really seen him, when I was too tired to look closely enough. Tears welled in her eyes. Thank you for giving me back my son. A profound silence filled the auditorium when she finished. Board Chairman Wells cleared his throat, visibly affected despite himself. We'll take a brief recess to consider what we've heard. Please remain seated. The board members filed out to a small conference room adjacent to the auditorium. Principal Mercer remained at his table, looking stunned by the outpouring of support. His eyes found Ethan's, and in them was a depth of gratitude that needed no words. 15 minutes later, the board returned. Chairman Wells approached the microphone, his demeanor markedly different, humbled perhaps by what he'd witnessed. The board has voted unanimously to offer Principal Robert Mercer a 3-year contract renewal with a mandate to continue his community outreach programs and leadership approach. The auditorium erupted in cheers and applause. Principal Mercer stood, visibly moved as students rushed forward to congratulate him. Ethan hung back, watching the celebration with a quiet satisfaction that went deeper than words. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Principal Mercer found him outside on the steps of the school. I don't know what to say, he admitted, the usually articulate administrator at a loss for words. Ethan smiled. You don't need to say anything. We were just returning the favor. The favor? You showed us who we could be. We just showed the board who you are. Principal Mercer placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, emotion making his voice rough. That night in the alley, I thought I was the one being rescued. I never imagined we were rescuing each other. Above them, stars pierced the winter darkness, pinpricks of light against the vast night. Neither spoke for a long moment, content in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and found strength in the connection. What happens now? Ethan finally asked. Principal Mercer considered the question, gazing up at the school building silhouetted against the night sky. Now we keep doing the work. We keep seeing people. We keep standing up when it matters. Together, Ethan asked. The older man smiled, the weight of the past months lifting from his shoulders. Together. As they walked back inside, Ethan reflected on how differently his life had unfolded from what he'd imagined 4 months ago. He had walked into that alley a shadow, a boy trying desperately to disappear. He had emerged something else entirely, someone who knew his own worth, someone who could see others clearly because he had finally been seen himself. A bullied teen had stood up to a mugger, never guessing the victim was the principal in disguise. But the real disguise had been the one Ethan wore for years, the invisibility he'd wrapped around himself for protection. It had taken an act of instinctive courage and an unexpected connection to reveal what lay beneath. A young man of remarkable strength, capable not just of defending himself, but of defending others. of making a difference. Sometimes Ethan realized the most important person you can rescue is yourself, and sometimes you need someone else to show you how.